Testing. It hears me. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Sorry that took me a minute. I had to get the streaming set up. So this is an interesting thing, trying to do that through this thing. There are a few things that we've got coming up that we want to make sure that we take care of. So we've got Taylorsville Days coming up in June, as well as the, sorry, I'm just drawing a blank. Pony Express, that's exactly what it was that I was trying to remember. So we've got those things coming up. We also are trying to get ahead of the game this year. Last year we were talking about doing a field day event at the park during Taylorsville Days. We ended up not having enough time, and then there was the accident with the West Valley event, so we decided not to worry about the stress of trying to figure all of the logistics out for that at that time. So this year we're trying to get ahead of all of that, and we're trying to get it set up now. So we wanted to gauge interest on that field day event. How many of you would be wanting to participate in an overnight field day event at the park here down the road if we were able to get permission to do that?
Do we know when it would be?
It would be during Taylorsville Days. I don't remember the exact dates. But I could find out for you in just a moment. Taylorsville Days this year is June 25th, 26th, and 27th. That's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So the event for us would be, let's see, field day is usually overnight from Saturday to Sunday. So it would be the 27th to the 28th. So anybody that wanted to participate in that. Also, if we do manage to do that, we're probably going to be having a booth at Taylorsville Days. I don't know if it would be all 3 days or if it would just be during the Saturday and then following that. So if we did have it all 3 days, we would need to make sure that we had several people there that would be willing to man the booth throughout each of the 3 days. But we're hoping to have some fun with that, give everybody an opportunity to do a few interesting things with radio. This would be the first time that we've done a field day event with the club. So it would be a learning experience for all of us, but certainly something that we want to try. Mainly because Taylorsville Days has always gotten in the way of us doing this, and if the city will let us have that event at the park, then we can do both. So we're hoping that we can get that done. Who would be interested in participating in that in some form? Okay, we got Peter.
I would be if it's something I qualify for, but I don't know that I qualify to help with anything.
I mean, so are you a technician or a general?
General, but
Okay.
I got that during COVID. I haven't even hooked up my radio that I've had for years because I'm afraid to put up the antenna because I don't understand the grounding.
So, I mean,
all I've got is my bowel thing, and I've only used that to call in once a week.
so we've got a few people, at least in the leadership, that they have a few HF radios that we would be setting up for this event. With the overnight stuff, there's going to be people there that, at least those that own the radios that are providing that they would be willing to teach you how to do these things. It being an all-night event, there's plenty of time to learn how to do that.
I would be interested.
So it's kind of like POTA, except it's all in one place, and we're not hunting parks or going to, well, other than the city park, we're not going to parks, but it should be generally fun. John, have you done field day before?
No.
No? But you've done extensive POTA stuff.
I've done quite a few POTA activations.
Okay. And my understanding is that it's pretty similar. So we should be able to have some fun with that.
So behave yourself. So protesting elements to field day.
Yeah. Now, technically, field day is not a contest, but we all understand that it really kind of is. It's partway between contest and not contest.
They don't call it a contest, but they post the contest results.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they do.
QST,
So it's interesting, but we just want to have the opportunity to have an experience with that. So if you've been thinking about doing field day, if we manage to make that happen this year, we're excited to have you join us and all of us learn how to do field day together. All right. So first, what we have to do is we have to submit a proposal to the city, or rather to the Taylorsville Days Planning Committee, so that we can actually get that done. If they say yes, then we'll have some space cordoned off for us to have both our booth and our antennas set up. They understand that we'll be staying overnight in the park. Normally, they would say the park is closed after a certain time. We're asking for a special permission for us to do that. But it shouldn't be too much of an issue, because with the carnival being taken down at the time, city police are still going to be present. So it shouldn't be a safety issue. They just need to know that we're there. Anyway, so do we have any other announcements for the club that need to be brought up? I can't think of any others. Oh, if you could come up here and hold a microphone.
I was interested in Ruland's announcement on his net last night, and hoping he'd be here to describe a little bit about what he's doing.
So,
Some mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in which he'll be dealing with amateur radio stuff, and that's about all I know.
yeah.
What they're doing is the area authorities, so the Utah area, is going to be putting together the emergency plans. And they will then go out and have these missionaries, like Ruland, go out and help the stakes set up their emergency plans. And so that's where the service comes in, much like maybe if you've been involved in family history, they have service missionaries that come and help you how to do family search or so forth and so on. That's essentially what they're going to be doing. I looked into it and talked to the gentleman that's over it from Utah County, and essentially asked a question of, if someone were to do this and they are also doing ARIES or another type of assignment, could they continue to do both? And he said no. You would have to choose basically this full-time or the other. And so my understanding is that it's approximately 20 hours a week. And so they are going to be coming up with the plans and helping get this kind of from the area level, rather than each stake trying to put together something. The area is going to help them do this.
So I take it from your explanation that we won't see Ruland again for another 18 to 24 months?
I don't know that for sure.
Currently, the assignment is going to have him occupied the same time that we have club meetings. So we're trying to figure out ways of how to make it so that we can still have him participate. That may mean that at least during that time, he's mainly participating in other events that we have. But we'll see what we can do. That's one of the reasons why we're streaming the meeting tonight, is so that he can at least come back and watch it later. So that that's why he's not here tonight. And my understanding is that the meetings for that weekly are at the same time as our club meeting. Do we have any other questions regarding that? I think it's a great opportunity for the for ham radio community to have that kind of a thing going on. It's going to boost her a lot. Any other things? I remembered as well that we also have the what are they calling it? The Ham Mobile Day or something like that. I've announced it before on the net, where they're doing a Utah Mobile Day for the state. They will just get out on the air anywhere. It doesn't have to be a state park. It could literally just be the city park. They just want you to be operating from your radios on specific frequencies, make contacts, and then report those contacts. And it can be in several different modes. They did specify the frequencies. You can go to the city parks or wherever. It just needs to be on mobile power, not shore power. So if you wanted to operate from your car, that's fine, that qualifies, but you can't use AC power plugging into a building.
That is from the same group that Rulin's going to be working with, actually.
Oh, is it?
It is.
Okay.
Because Lynn is the one that brought those flyers up to the swap meet and asked them to be put out.
Okay. So I'm excited for it. Utah Valley Amateur Radio Club, they're the ones that are kind of disseminating most of the information. So if you went to their website, you'd find more information there, but they also have it on Facebook and a few other places. So I will continue to announce that during the nets as best as we can, just to keep everybody remembering that that's what's going on. If we don't have any other announcements, tonight we're talking about the history of ham radio with NASA and spaceflight. I am going to first preface this. I am by no means an expert in this. I really just got interested in the topic as I was watching the Artemis II mission fly around the backside of the moon. And I was like, oh gosh, that would be really cool to think about the way that ham radio has affected the space program, and how we have space stuff going on within ham radio, not involving NASA either. So we'll go ahead and go over a bunch of that. One second.
So did anybody do ESE? Earth, spaceship, Earth? Bounce a signal off the spaceship? Nobody? No, I don't have an EME set up either, so.
We'll talk a little bit about some of that stuff. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start. So there we go. So ham radio has been involved in the space program from basically nearly the very, very beginning. The space program itself began in 1957 when Russia launched Sputnik. They've been doing a bunch of different things with the program. We've got Sputnik, Explorer, Mercury, Vostok, Gemini, and the space program did say that it's Gemini, not Gemini. So Sputnik was the first satellite that went up into space, and then on that one in 1966, the Gemini program ended, and that was where they were actually first exploring sending people to the moon. I think it was Gemini 8 that they flew around the moon the first time. and Jim Lovell was part of that. He was also famous for being the commander of Apollo 13. So he got to do the same thing twice, basically, fly around the moon twice, but never got to step foot on there. But they were first developing orbital comms during that time. They realized that when they go around the backside of the moon, you lose line of sight with the radio and you can't communicate for a time. And we're still working to overcome that, but we'll talk a little bit about what we've got going on. Maybe it wasn't Gemini, it might have been Apollo 8 that flew around the moon. So in '67, they started the Apollo program. Russia, or the Soviet Union, was doing the Soyuz program. And we started to have early ComSats in there. So AMSAT, which is amateur radio satellites, that organization formed in 1967 to pursue the Oscar program, which was a amateur radio satellites. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Then in '76 through 1988, they developed the shuttle program. Linear Oscar transponders enabled two-way communication as well. So more or less, that's when they started putting up amateur radio repeaters in space. In 1989 through 1999, the Soviet Union had the space station Mir, and they had some amateur radio stuff up there. And then we also had SARX, which is Shuttle Amateur Radio Experiment. So they had a few different experiments involving the space shuttle there. And in that, with that program was the first time that we actually had an actual amateur radio operator up in space as an astronaut, talking with people to the Earth. And then in today, from 2000 to the present, we have the ARIS program on the International Space Station. It's currently the biggest part of the space and amateur radio program. But we also have CubeSats, which are amateur radio satellites. They're about, I believe they're like 4 inches by 4 inches by 6 inches. They're just this tiny little machine. They get launched up with a bunch of other different things. They don't send rockets up for those on their own, but you can pay to get one added to the payload of other missions. And those are available for us to access, and most of them are just repeaters that are orbiting the Earth. So you can make contacts with the repeaters and have a lot of fun. Let's see. So that was the overview. Now we'll just kind of go over with kind of how it started. So even before the NASA program existed, amateur radio operators were experimenting with different things. In the image there you see, oh, you guys don't see that. There we go. In that image there you see an amateur radio operator holding a weather balloon, and at the bottom of that thing she's got a rather large radio attached to the weather balloon, and she's going to try to launch it. So they were testing high altitude balloons, beacons, and telemetry. And they were trying to do all sorts of different things to establish, just experimenting with what radio could do in the atmosphere, which naturally leads you to think of what it can do outside of the atmosphere. The IARU was established in 1925 to represent amateur interests internationally. And it began to establish coordination norms. And grassroots engineering culture produced the program that ultimately ended up in Oscar, and that was a specific series of hardware that came out. So we have some AMSATs. So AMSAT stands for amateur radio, and Oscar stands for orbiting satellite carrying amateur radio. So that is one of the different versions of Oscar that they put out, just a couple of mock-ups of that one. But the very, very first one was Oscar 1. That is the actual satellite. They brought it back from space, and now it sits in a museum. It was launched in 1969, and it transmitted on 144.983 megahertz. It sent one very, very simple transmission on repeat. It was CW for just the word hi. So it was just telling everybody hi, and you could listen in and hear that. And they developed over time a little bit more complex stuff, and ultimately it led into what we have today. So AMSAT came after the Oscar program, and kind of in conjunction with it, they became the main organization that pushed to get amateur radio satellites up into space. They have international chapters to develop launch access and operation protocols. So more or less, if you're interested in getting a satellite up into space for amateur radio, you go through AMSAT, and they will help coordinate getting that up there, specifically helping you figure out who's sending a launch up there, who has the room or is willing to let you launch your satellite with their stuff. And the modes on that one, the transponders there, it's A and B linear, so it's basically just uplink, downlink. And more or less, it's just like I said, it's a repeater. So it'll send two-way QSOs, single sideband and CW operation right through the satellite, and it'll bounce it up, send it back down on a different part of the Earth, and you can have contacts internationally via space. It's very similar to the way that you would do EME or Earth, Moon, Earth, except that because it's a repeater picking up the frequency or the transmission, the difference between Earth, Moon, Earth and the AMSAT stuff is that the AMSAT functions just like any other regular repeater. The signal's going to be nice and clear because it's boosting your signal again. If you're bouncing it off of the moon, you can get that signal across, but it's going to be distorted by the surface of the moon itself. And so it kind of scatters, and Earth, Moon, Earth has a really funny sound. But AMSAT, you should generally be able to hear it pretty well. Some notable satellites include the AO-7, launched in 1974, which demonstrated long-term survivability and clever battery hermetic designs. It's a challenge that you have getting a satellite up into space and then being able to power it. And so battery power is a necessary thing, but if you don't have a way to keep it powered long-term, then your satellite is going to be kind of pointless in a little while. We all understand as we try to do our portable ops how much those batteries are important. I don't know what batteries they're using now, but I imagine that LiFePO4 batteries would be very difficult to use in space considering how cold it would be. And then there's a lot of engineering and university partnerships towards developing new technologies with AMSAT. So NASA became interested in figuring out how to include amateur radio pretty early. By the 1970s, they were trying to figure out ways to include it. They were watching people do the satellite programs. Oh, sorry, before I get too far away from the Oscar, we'll go back to that picture for a second. Oops, hang on. Okay, back to the Oscar. One interesting thing about Oscar 1 was how early this was actually launched. So Sputnik was launched in 1957. Oscar 1 was launched in 1961, just 4 years later. So we had amateur radio satellites in space before we had manned space flight, which is really, really cool. Anyway, back to the NASA interests in this. They wanted to figure out ways that they could include amateur radio, but the challenge is they're sending guys up into space inside this capsule that's meant to keep all of the radiation, including radio transmissions, out for the safety of the astronauts. And they were having a hard time being able to get a feed line outside in order to put up an antenna that could actually transmit. You can imagine how hard it is for us to keep the weather out of our house when we do a feed line through the house. Imagine what they would be dealing with when they're trying to keep air in as they put a feed line out. So they had to figure that out, but the first thing that they did was they just designed a a really, really interesting antenna that they carried over to the window of the space shuttle, hooked up to a handheld, and they operated that way. They started with the space shuttle to do that just because they felt that there was enough interest at that time. And they were coordinating with the ARRL, AMSAT, and NASA in order to get the SARX program going. SARX continued through the entire duration of the space shuttle program. And mainly the entire program was designed to get engagement from students, whether that be college or primary and secondary school. They just wanted to get kids involved in amateur radio in that way and get them involved in STEM. They were also concerned about some of the safety factors besides keeping the shuttle intact. They were concerned about whether or not the radio keying up could cause fires and different things like that. So there were a lot of different things that they were worried about that they had to figure out. But the things that they learned during that period of time allowed them to develop new programs that ultimately went into a lot of what's going on today. The first astronaut that was also an amateur radio operator, he's pictured here. His name, it's really Owen Garriott. We'll come back to him in a second, but the handheld that you see right there, that's the radio that he was operating from. Like I said, he'd just carry I think he made a dipole out of wire and carried it over to the window of the space shuttle facing the Earth and started transmitting. The space station travels from horizon to horizon in 10 minutes. And I think the space shuttle was traveling about the same period of time. And because they were going through the window during his first transmission, he only managed to make one contact. But it made some history there. They were mainly doing FM voice and packet radio for telemetry and messaging during that period of time. And it required scheduling time in order for the astronauts to be there and to make contacts down on Earth, which is still the protocol that they follow now. The astronauts are not constantly picking up the radio. They can pick it up during their free time or during scheduled time, but they also have their other missions. Let's see, okay. Sorry, we'll go back to what the heck? I gotta stop touching the mouse. So Owen Garriott, he actually passed away in 2019. And I believe his son is also an astronaut and was chasing, he made, I think, over 1,000 contacts during his time as an astronaut from the space shuttle. And he probably would have been doing it during the Apollo program too. He was on the planned cruise for some of the Apollo missions after Apollo 18, which was the last mission that they did. But then they canceled the program, so they never incorporated amateur radio into the Apollo program. But some of the things that they had been talking about doing during that time was putting an amateur radio on one of the lunar rovers and doing contacts directly from the lunar surface, which would have been really cool if they could have realized that at the time. Now that we're going back to the moon, I think that is likely going to be happening. So following the space shuttle and concurrent with it, they put some amateur radio stations on the space station Mir. They've hosted voice and packet experiments, and they used Russian call signs on that station. So the call sign for Mir was ROMIR, or R0MIR. And they made contacts with mainly schools again. It broadened interest in amateur radio with the space program, and there were a lot of experimentation with that, both between the space shuttle SARX program and the Mir program. they were developing procedures that ended up leading to our ARIS program that we have now. They had RF interference management that they were working with there, and they developed even further things for scheduling and coordination with ground networks. So ARIS specifically stands for Amateur Radio on the International Space Station. That was, like I said, it was developed following what they learned during the TARC and MIR programs. And it was made in coordination with the space agencies that were working with each other to develop the International Space Station. That included NASA, the European Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency, the Russian Space Agency, and the Japanese agencies, as well as AMSAT and ARRL. Following, as they were all starting to talk together, NASA came to the amateur radio community because they had AMSAT, they had ARRL, and they had a few other amateur radio communities that were all saying, we want this, and NASA came back and said, okay, we're down for doing this, but we only want to talk to one group, so you guys all have to form one group that does all of the communication between all of you and us. And that is how ARIS was formed. ARIS is a separate nonprofit that works and coordinates with NASA and all of the other communities, but is not NASA itself. It's just part of a program. With that, as they were developing and designing the space station, they worked on solving those problems that they were experiencing with the shuttle. They figured out how to put an antenna outside without having to worry about atmospheric loss or anything like that. And they were able to install several permanent amateur installations there. They have a UHF, VHF voice. They've got an APRS digipeater, slow scan television events, and they schedule school contacts. It's really cool to see some of the videos on YouTube about those contacts that they do, because they'll put most of the kids of the school just in the auditorium, and they'll schedule to have either a local station set up at the school and they contact the space station, or they do remote station and they stream it to the school, but then they can all talk directly with the astronauts on the space station that way. And every time you contact the space station, if you do so, they will send you a QSL card saying that you successfully contacted the space station. They will also do that if you manage to make a contact through the repeater on the space station. So that's really cool that they'll do that. I don't know exactly how they're tracking who's connecting to it, but they do, and you get a cool QSL card. And apparently it's really, really difficult because you can do it with handheld stuff, or you can do it with like tripod mounted antennas that are motorized and track it, but being able to time it and then also understanding that like you're facing 50% of the Earth anytime it's passing over, and you're fighting against every other person on that 50%, trying to contact the space station all at once. So while you're trying, you may not succeed in getting in. So there's a small group of the larger ham radio community that's actually managed to make contact. The youngest person to ever make contact with the space station was actually a little girl in England, and I believe she was 6 years old. But she managed to make that a few years ago. And her father he's one of those that has a very big radio setup at his house that's motorized. He does Earth-Moon, Earth bounce, and he chases the space station all the time. And he managed to make that contact. So this image there, every one of those numbers is a location on the space station where they have a different type of amateur radio antenna. And then inside the space station itself, they have 2 different radios hooked up to those different antennas. They've got one in the service module, which is on the Russian controlled side of it, and then they have another one on the Columbia module, which is the US controlled side of it. And basically in the astronauts' free time or during scheduled events, they can hop on and just do whatever they want. NASA's main interest in incorporating amateur radio besides research was to break up the monotony of some of the things that they were, like the astronauts deal with, and also to provide an opportunity for them to contact their families. Before the internet, it was really difficult for the astronauts to contact their families other than through amateur radio. So they did that so that it would be good for their astronauts' mental health. ARIS does coordinate safety, crew training, and frequency licensing, as well as age and educational outreach worldwide. It's the only organization that gets to work directly with the space agencies to take care of all of this stuff. And so the crossband repeater that they have on there, they had it and then they reestablished, it went away for a while, but then they reestablished it in 2020, making even casual participation. So the rest of us that are not part of the school trying to get in contact, that's the best way to do it, is just try to use the crossband repeater to make contact with somebody on Earth via this or the space station. They've got a bunch of different hardware on there. That is kind of a mock-up of what the actual rack inside the space station looks like for all the different equipment. You probably can't read any of it, but it's all connected in there. The radios that they have on board, they're typically, they do change them out from time to time because the equipment doesn't necessarily last forever. Space station has been around for 26 years. They, like I said, they can do VHF. They can do VHF voice, APRS. VHF voice is specifically on 2 meters. That's the one that they've got set up there. AFSK, single sideband, and then sometimes they do UHF downlinks as well as the crossband repeaters. It's really interesting when you're talking about satellites and the space station, because you have to deal with what is called Doppler effect. Because when you're watching the space station approach, it's moving towards you and it changes the frequency at which you can transmit in order to successfully catch them. And then as it leaves, it lengthens your frequency. So it's shorter as it approaches you and it's longer as it leaves, and so you actually have to adjust the frequency that you're transmitting on just to adjust and have it end up be the right frequency as it arrives at the space station. So I was going to try to provide a handout for everybody, but I didn't get time to print them out. But I have them available if people are interested. It's got a little checklist of what to do as you are trying to make contact with the space station, but it included saying, here are the frequencies that you need to pre-program into your radio so that as it's moving overhead, you can switch between those frequencies quickly so that you still have your 10-minute window. You don't want to have to be fiddling around with the radio while you try to make these contacts. So that's the Doppler correction. Antenna polarization is also important. It didn't say, I know that I heard, but I do not remember whether they said it was vertical or horizontally polarized relative to the Earth. But your polarization can greatly affect whether you make a successful contact with the space station or not. And then you do need to make sure that you're isolating outside noise so that you make that successful contact and that you're in compliance with EMC. And then, let's see, next. So technical milestones with that. This diagram here is just some spectrum comparisons with the way that FM, single sideband, and narrowband digital modes are working. And you can kind of see exactly how much spectrum they take up. NASA is very particular in maintaining very strict frequency allocations for those things because they've got so many different instrumentations on there that are sensitive to RF. If there's a problem, it can cause problems. So they heavily regulate what their equipment will do, and if our equipment doesn't quite match up with that, you may not get a successful contact. But they can do 1200 and 9600 BPS packet. They've introduced PSK and weak signal modes, linear transponders for SSB and CW, ground antennas, polarization control, and SDR have actually improved a lot of what people can do, and it's getting easier, but it's still hard. Software tracking as well. So basically an app on your phone that can help you know when the space station's passing overhead. And it, like I said, from one horizon to the other, it's 10 minutes. I don't remember exactly how long it takes for the space station to orbit the Earth entirely, but it does this pass, I think it was like 11 times a day. So we do have several amateur radio operators that have been astronauts on the space station. We've already mentioned Owen Garriott. He was the first amateur operator in space. His call sign was W5LFL, and he really lobbied to be able to just carry that on there. He was like, I want to bring a radio, and they fought him at first, and they're like, okay, we'll do it. So Bill Shepard, KD5 GSL, he was the first ham QSO on the space station, and that was with a school, so they coordinated that one to make that happen. They've had Kjell Lindgren, K05 MOS, and Samantha Cristoforetti, IZ0UDF, were also on there recently. And they've got so many other licensed operators that are up there. It is no accident that so many astronauts have also been licensed operators, because amateur radio and STEM go hand in hand. Some of the other notable people are currently still up in space on their way back from the moon as we speak. 3 of the 4 astronauts